y'all, welcome back to Keeping Up with KJ. My name is Kanisha and I'm a first-time home buyer who is transforming my first home one DIY project at a time. A few weeks ago, I showed you all how I transformed my linen closet in just 3 days. And today I'm going to break down how I created those DIY floating shelves so that way you can do it too. If you haven't seen the full tutorial of the linen closet makeover, I'm going to link that down below and right here. And I know somebody's going to ask, is this project really DIY beginner friendly? So if I created a scale of 0, I've never picked up a tool before, to a 10 where I don't call anyone, I fix everything in my home, I would rate this project a 5 out of 10. Now, if you get a big box store to cut down the wood for you, I would decrease the rating to a 3 out of 10 for difficulty. So if you think you're ready to give this project a try, be sure to keep watching because it's time to start keeping up with KJ. The first thing we're going to talk about for this project is going to be our measuring and planning. And there's 3 things that you need to focus on. Number 1, you want to measure your space to determine whether or not it's square. This is going to require you to have a tape measure to measure all sides of the space. Most small closet spaces in a home aren't going to be square, and this can make this project a little bit more complicated, but I'll show you how that'll affect your project later on. Number 2 is going to be finding your studs. It's really important when you're hanging anything on the walls in your home that you're securing that item into the studs, and if you don't have a stud available, then you want to make sure that you're using drywall anchors. But I'm talking about studs, but I haven't even explained to you what that actually is. So a stud is going to be a vertical board that's going to go from the floor to the ceiling that is going to help keep your home stable, and it's a part of the framing process. Usually studs are about 16 inches apart, but that's why you need to use a stud finder to make sure that you know exactly where those studs are in that space. If a stud is not available, then you're going to want to make sure you use a drywall anchor, and I'll show you how to install those as well. And number 3, you want to determine your shelf spacing. This is how much space is going to be in between your actual shelves, and this is really important. So if you already know what containers you want to put in this space or what items you want to keep on these shelves, make sure that those items can fit in between the shelves without having to bump against the lip of the shelf. Next, we're going to talk about building the supports for your shelves. So the first thing that we're going to talk about is cutting your boards down to size. So I use select pine 1.5 by 2 inch by either 2 feet or 3 feet. And just depending on, so I use the longer boards for the back because the back of my space was longer than what my depth of my shelves were going to be. Okay, so to simplify this process, I want you to think about cut A and cut B. Cut A is going to be the length of the back of your shelf, which is going to be the length of your back support board. Next, for cut B, I want you to think about how deep you want your shelves to be, and that will be cut B. For cut B, you're going to need 2 of those because you're going to need one on the right side of the wall and then one on the left side of the wall. The next step in this project is going to be securing those boards to the wall. So remember, you've already found your studs using your stud finder. And so now I'm going to secure each board in place in 2 different locations. If there's a stud there, I will not use a drywall anchor. But if there is not a stud available, I'm going to have to use a drywall anchor, which I have linked with all of the other materials for this project down below in the caption. To make sure all of my boards are in the correct place, I am going to pre-drill my holes, and that's going to also help with my drywall anchor placement. A laser level is not required for this project, but I highly recommend getting one because it's going to be a great tool for your toolbox that's going to help you make sure that your items are level without having to actually hold the level in place. Now, I did use a handheld level just to kind of help with some final adjustments, but having that laser level was definitely a game changer for this project. So once you set up your laser level and you put your board in place, you're going to use your drill to pre-drill your holes. Once your holes are pre-drilled, you're going to go and screw in your drywall anchors. So you can actually use your drill for this if you use these specific drywall anchors. Once the drywall anchors are in place, then you put your board back up, line everything back up, and then use your screws that will come with those drywall anchors to secure that board to the wall. Again, in the places where there was a stud, I did not put a drywall anchor in that spot, but I still pre-drilled the hole. And from there, this is just going to be a rinse and repeat until all of these support boards are in place. Now we're getting into the most complicated part about this project, which is cutting the actual shelves. Now, again, if you want to decrease the difficulty of this project, go ahead and get a big box store to cut down your plywood for you. But of course, I start all of my projects with a slight hint of delusion. So I decided to do all of this myself while trying to get this project done in just 3 days. So I use my Craig rip jig to cut down the plywood to the depth of the shelves or how deep I wanted my shelves to be, But again, if your space is not square, this is where this project starts to get a little tricky. Step number 1, you want to get a carpenter square and place it in the corner of the shelf on top of your support. Once that carpenter square is in that corner, you're then going to measure from the edge of the carpenter square to the wall, and you're going to do that on both the right sides and the left sides. Okay, make sure you are identifying which measurement goes to which side. That's really important too. Once you have that information, you're going to go down to your cutting station, your workstation. And so what I did was I was already starting off with a square board. So I started in the bottom right corner. I went to the back right corner, took away the difference from the right side from the carpenter square. I then measured across the back, which was the back length of my shelves, marked that measurement. Then use my carpenter square to see what would create a square on the left side of my board. And then I added that additional left side measurement between the wall and the carpenter square on my board on the left side. Again, I really hope that makes sense, but the tutorial that I did use to understand that process, again, is linked down below. Next, we are going to talk about installing your face frames. Now that the hard part of this project is over, it is smooth sailing from here. So the next step is going to be installing the face frames to create that floating shelf look. And so to make this as least complicated as possible, I decided to use that select pine again, but in a different measurement. This time I used the 1/2 inch by 3 inch by 3 foot. I then used my miter saw to cut those down to size, which would essentially be the front length of the shelf. And from there, I use my brad nailer to install those front faces to the bottom of my shelf. Now, anytime you are using a brad nailer, you risk the chance of having blowout, which means that the nail will pop through the back of the surface. So to help decrease this, a good tip that I found is to turn your brad nailer perpendicular to the surface, which will help the nail kind of shoot in the correct way. From there, anytime you use a brad nailer, there's always going to be a small indentation where the nail pushed through the wood. So now you need to fill that space. So because I'm staining these shelves, I use some color changing wood filler, added a little bit of water, and then use my spatula to go in and just use as least amount as possible to just make that surface flat and prepare it for stain. Now, the last step of this project is going to be sanding and staining. So once your wood is completely dry, you're going to use some 220 grit sandpaper to go in and completely smooth out the surface of the tops of the shelves as well as the front of them as well, because you really want to make sure that you get a good sanding in before you go in with your stain. Anytime I am sanding wood, once I'm finished sanding, I go in with the tack cloth just to help remove any of that dust and debris to make sure that I have a nice clean surface for my stain. Now, you can use whatever stain you choose. I decided to go with Men Wax's Golden Pecan, and it's funny because I literally bought 2 new samples and then used the one that I already had at my house. To apply your stain, I saw a tip that Delusion DIY used. I'm pretty sure I hope I'm pronouncing that right. So instead of using like one of the tools that you can buy from a big box store, she actually used a glove and a sock, and it really helped just make the application process super smooth and easy by just taking my hand and then running that sock across the surface. Now, originally, I did not plan for the voiceover of this project to be this long, but I really wanted to give a detailed tutorial for all of the other DIY beginners who will really feel confident getting started on this project. So if you're still watching this video, be sure to hit that like button. Also save this video so that way you can come back to it when you get stuck in the middle of the project. Y'all, I literally do that all of the time. So don't underestimate the value of saving a video. And also hit that subscribe button because there's a lot more coming from the channel, and it's time to start keeping up with KJ.